And you are called light. Tell your neighbor, you're light. And when God gives us a new name, it speaks of our identity and purpose.
And what?
Purpose. And so we have, because of Jesus, a new identity and a new purpose. We have something he wants us to do. That's not a little pebble thing. It's a big rock thing. And part of this conference is to prepare you to do greater things. Are you ready? All right, let's pray. We're going to continue talking about the kingdom. What did Jesus say? He said, don't pray that your kingdom come. Pray that his kingdom come. Stop building your kingdom and build his. And build his. So I invite you in your Bibles to turn to Matthew chapter 5. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is inviting people to join the kingdom. He invited Peter and Andrew, James and John. He invites the poor and the outcast. And then in chapter 5, he gathers people together on a mountain. And he says, this is what the kingdom is like. And he preaches the Sermon on the Mount. It was a 22-minute sermon about the kingdom. And he starts with blessing. He says, this is how you have a blessed life. Who wants a blessed life? We all want a blessed life. We ask God to bless us. And here's what God says is about a blessed life. In verse 3 of Matthew 5, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He says he gives us his kingdom, not because of what we do or how rich we are in righteousness, but it's that we can't do it. He died for us, and he gives us. Say, I have the kingdom. I have the kingdom. And then he says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And they're mourning because of sorrow. And they're mourning because of their sin. And they're mourning because they were building their kingdom. And Jesus said, when we understand the depth of our sorrow, we will be comforted. He wants to comfort us. And then Jesus goes on and he said, blessed are the meek, for they get the whole earth. And sometimes we don't like that word meek because we think it means weak. But meek has a sense of power. It's a sense of power under control. It's not a wild horse, but a tame horse. And he says, we will inherit the earth. We have the kingdom. We are comforted. We have the earth. And then he said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they're going to be filled. How many are filled from lunch? How many so full you want to have a nap? Imagine being that filled with righteousness.
Pardon?
Imagine being that filled with righteousness. And then he said, blessed are the merciful, for those who show mercy to others, who don't treat others as they deserve. Because that's what we want to do. We want to give it to people when they hurt us. We want to judge people. We want to punish them. But Jesus says when we give mercy, we receive mercy. Are you seeing the fullness of blessing? Because he goes on, he said, blessed are the pure in heart. In Jesus' day, the bowels, the stomach, was where they felt their feelings. And the heart was their motives. He said, blessed are the pure in their motives, for they will see God. Don't you want to see God? Experience Him. Know Him. And then he said, blessed are the peacemakers. Not the people who fake peace. Not the people who just keep peace. But those who take God's peace and they share it with others, because they will be called the children of God. That we're children of God. We're sons and daughters of the King. And then he said, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. Not persecuted for the foolish things they do, but because they point people to Jesus. How many of you have been persecuted ever? Anybody experience that? Yours is the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus starts with these blessings. He said, you will have the kingdom of heaven. You will be comforted. You will inherit the earth and be full. You will experience mercy and see God. You will be called the children of God. And you will see the kingdom of heaven. So friends, do you walk in that blessing? Do you get up every day and know I'm blessed? Too many times we get up and we're, oh, poor me, I need a blessing. Jesus has given you a blessing. And now what are you going to do with it? Here's what Jesus says in verse 13. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. Jesus says you are salt. My new name is salt. Now notice, Jesus does not command us to be salt. Sometimes we look at this passage and we think, oh, I should try to be salt. He says, because you are blessed, you have a new identity. You are salt. Say, I am salt. When I go into the world, I am not my name. I am salt. When I go back to my home, I'm not just mama papa. I'm salt in my home. Now why does Jesus follow the Beatitudes by saying we're salt? It's because we have been blessed to be a blessing to others. And when we talk about the greater works, this is what we're talking about. That take the blessing of God and we bless others. And this is always God's intention. If you go back to Genesis 12, God starts with a man named Abram. And he says, Abram, I want you to come to a new land, because I'm going to bless you. He says in verse 2, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I'm going to make your name great, and you're going to be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all peoples on the earth will be blessed because of you. And God says, Abram, I'm going to pour out my blessing on you, not so you can keep it to yourself, but that you can bless others. And obviously it's through Abraham that the world was blessed through Jesus. But God said to the people of Israel, I'm going to bless you so that other nations will be blessed. You're going to be light to point people to me. And so as Jesus starts teaching about the kingdom, He says, do you know your blessing?
Abuuza nti mumanyi omukisa gwammwe?
Because you're to share that blessing with the world.
Kubanga mulina okusigabana omukisa ogwo n'ensi.
Because you are the salt of the earth.
Kubanga muli munnyo gwa nsi.
Now, the problem is, as I said, we want to keep it to ourselves.
Ekizibu kiri nti nga bwe mbagambye twagala omukisa tugwesigalize.
We're afraid if we give away the blessing,
tulina okutya mbu singa omukisa tumala ne tugugaba,
we'll be empty.
Tugenda kubanga tuweddemu nga tetulina kye tusigazza.
If we give away the blessing,
nti bwe tugaba omukisa guno,
other people will have it and we won't.
Abantu abalala bayinza okutugutujjako ffe ne tusigala nga tetulina.
But God's kingdom economy is different from the world's economy. God's business is different than the world's business. The more we give away, the more we are blessed. So let me illustrate. In Israel, there's one big long river. It's called the Jordan River. And the Jordan River goes through the Sea of Galilee. And then it goes down and empties into the Dead Sea. And why is the Dead Sea dead? Because water doesn't come out of it. The river stops and the water stays there. And it becomes stagnant. And it has a lot of minerals. And there's no life there. But the Sea of Galilee is full of life. There's fish in there. And why is it alive and the Dead Sea dead? Because the water comes in and it goes out. The blessing comes in and the blessing goes out. And you can't do great things if you're holding on to the blessing. Because you're too worried about keeping the blessing and not about sharing it. And so God says we're blessed to be a blessing. Now Israel knew this. And they knew that Abram was blessed, so they would be blessed. They knew that God made a promise to them that if he blessed them, they should bless others. And so they did something to remind themselves of this. When they gave an offering to God, they sprinkled it with salt. And you may go and you may think, well, does God need salt on his offerings? It's not that God needs to taste salt. It's that salt is a sign of this covenant of blessing. And in case you think I'm crazy, turn to Leviticus chapter 2. And in verse 14, Moses says, if you bring a grain offering of first fruits to the Lord, wait a minute. Oh, sorry, it's above. verse 12, you may bring them to the Lord as an offering of the first fruits. But they are not to be offered on the altar as pleasing aroma. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings. So when the people were listening to Jesus, and he's saying you're the salt of the earth, they knew that he was maybe referring to the salt covenant. This covenant that if God blesses us, we're to bless each other. Now, why salt? In the Old Testament, when people made a promise to each other, a contract or a covenant, they would eat a little bit of salt. It was a sign that they were committed. Because salt was very valuable. In fact, salt was sometimes worth more than money. In fact, the Roman soldiers in the Roman Empire were paid with salt. They weren't paid with money. They were paid with salt. And that's where in the English we get the word salary. Salary from salt. Because it's valuable. And so when Jesus says you are blessed, and then he says now you are the salt of the earth. Now who is he speaking to? Many of these were poor, sick, they were enslaved, they had no power, they were the weakest of the earth. Many of them had never even traveled outside their village. But Jesus says you're the salt of the whole earth. Now what's it mean for us to be salt? What are we supposed to do? Salt does two things. The first is it prevents decay. That you put salt on meat sometimes to keep it from spoiling. And also what they would do, and I asked Pastor Mike if I could share this, and he said yes. He said when they went to the bathroom outside their house, they didn't want to leave a smelly mess. And so they would take salt and they would put it on the smelly mess to keep it from smelling and decaying. And you may think those Canadian pastors think strangely. But in Luke's gospel, he says if salt has lost its saltiness, It's not worth even putting on the dung pile. It won't prevent decay. And so Jesus says we're blessed to help stop the decay of sin. That you're blessed to stop decay in your home. To stop decay in your workplace. To stop decay in your community. And the church is to stop decay. Part of the reason your church is in your community is to stop the spread of sin. And so when you love people with Jesus' love, you stop decay. When you deliver people from evil spirits, you stop decay. When you pray for the sick, you stop decay. When you help people financially, you stop decay. Our world society thinks, the world thinks, that if we just get more education or more medicine or more counseling or more money or a better government, that will stop decay. The only way to stop decay, the only way to stop decay is through the one man Jesus. By taking Jesus to your community. And we're called to be salt. To take the blessing that Jesus gives us and share it around. Give it away. Now the second thing salt does is that it enhances flavor. You put salt on food not to change the flavor, but to enhance it. Pepper changes the flavor. Pepper changes the flavor. But salt enhances it. In fact, they would put salt in their gardens so their gardens would taste better. So the fruit would taste better. Yeah. And we are the salt of the earth to enhance what Jesus is doing. Just for a moment, where is the Spirit working in your life? Do you know where the Spirit is leading? So you can enhance what He's doing. What is the Spirit doing in your church? Where is the Spirit working? So that you can come along and enhance it. So that you can partner with what God is doing. Too many times we're like, I don't know what God's doing. And God is waiting for us to come along and go where He's going. And we are the salt of the earth.
Kyokka ffe tuli munnyo gwa nsi.
To enhance what God is doing.
Okukoopa oba okukola ekyo Katonda ky'akola.
And to move where God is moving.
Tutambule nga Katonda bw'atambula.
In 64 AD,
mu kyasa kya 64,
the Romans were killing all the Christians.
Abaroma battanga abakristaayo bonna.
They were hanging them on crosses.
Babateekanga ku misaalaba.
Feeding them to lions.
Nga babawaayo eri empologoma ne zibalya.
And they were being killed by gladiators.
Ne battibwanga gladiators.
And 300 years later,
emyaka 3 bwe gyayita,
the crosses weren't used to kill Christians.
Emisaalaba egyakozesebwanga okutta abakristaayo.
They were on churches. They were on churches
Gyalinga ku makanisa
to point people to Jesus.
Okubanga giraga abantu okutunuulira Yesu.
In 300 years,
Emyaka 3 bwe gyayita,
the church grew.
Ekkanisa n'ekula.
Despite persecution,
ng'ogyewo okuyiganyizibwa,
because they were salt,
kubanga ekkanisa yali efuuse omunnyo,
because they loved,
kubanga baayagala,
because they did what no one else would do.
Kubanga baakolanga abantu abalala kye bataakolanga.
In fact, one Roman governor
Era omusajja omu gavana w'Abaroma
wrote Caesar and said, do not kill the Christians,
n'agamba Caesar nti totta bakristaayo,
because they do
kubanga bakola
what no one else does.
abantu abalala bonna kye batakola.
They love
Baagala
like no one else does.
ng'omuntu omulala yenna bw'atayagala.
They care for the sick
Bafaayo eri abalwadde
like no one else does.
teri mulala akikola.
They feed the widow and orphan
Baliisa bannamwandu n'abannamulekwa
like no one else does.
ate nga teri mulala yenna akikola.
And even though they were persecuted,
Era newankubadde nga baayiganyizibwanga,
they knew they would be blessed
baamanyanga nti tujja weebwa omukisa
when they gave a blessing.
bwe baagabanga omukisa.
You are salt.
Gw'oli munnyo.
Pastors,
Abasumba,
teach your people to be salt.
muyigirize abantu bammwe okubeera omunnyo.
It's not just you.
Si ggwe, tekiri ku ggwe wekka.
Every Christian in your church
Buli mukristaayo mu kkanisa yo
is salt.
oyo omukristaayo munnyo.
But there is one problem.
Naye waliwo ekizibu kimu.
Salt,
Omunnyo,
like salt,
ng'omunnyo bw'oguwulira.
too much. Salt like salt too much.
Omunnyo nga bw'oguwulira nga mungi.
We love the salt shaker. We love being in the salt shaker, being together.
Okay, twagala nnyo okubeera awamu.
We don't want to touch the meat.
Tetwagala, okay, ffe ng'omunnyo twagala nnyo okubeera awamu, tetwagala kukwata ku nnyama.
We don't want to get into the world's mess.
Ffe tetwagala kuyingira mu buvuyo bwa nsi.
We sometimes like our little church too much.
Ebiseera ebisinga tweyagala nnyo 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 ng'ekkanisa.
And we like being together with other salt.
Ne twagala omunnyo n'omunnyo tubeere wamu, teri kufuluma.
And we like worshiping with salt.
Ffe ne twagala okusinza kwaffe tukukole na munnyo.
And we like fellowshipping with salt.
Anze omunnyo nina kuŋŋaana na munnyo munnange.
And then we've lost our saltiness.
Olwo nno kitegeeza ensi etuweddemu.
We would rather complain about the world
Waakiri tugende eri ensi twemulugunye ku nsi
than be salt
okusinga okubeera omunnyo,
to change the world.
tubeere omunnyo ogukyusa ensi.
You are salt.
Oli munnyo.
So let me ask you,
Kankubuuze,
where do you need to preserve evil in your community?
mbuuza ekibuuzo, ddi oba wa bwe weetaagira okutangira ekibi mu kitundu kyo?
What is God asking you to do
Ekyo Katonda kyakusabye okukola?
to stop the decay and destruction?
Kiki Katonda kyakugambye okukola okukomya okuwunya n'okuzikirira mu kitundu kyo?
What is God asking you to do
Katonda kiki kyakusabye okukola?
to send the devil away?
Okugoba emizimu,
Because you are salt.
kubanga oli munnyo.
Then Jesus goes on to say,
Yesu ne yeeyongera n'agamba,
says that you are light. In verse 14, he says you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. So Jesus said, you are light. Say together, I am light. I am light.
I am light.
Now, we just cannot suddenly glow. I just can't suddenly turn a switch on and shine. But I can reflect the light of the one light of the world. Just as the moon does not shine light, it reflects the sun. When Jesus says we're the light of the world, it's not the light of our personality. It's not the light of our achievements. It's the light of the one man, Jesus. And we're to shine. Now notice here, Jesus answers two questions. He answers why we are where we are, and he answers what we're to do there. So the first thing he says is you are a city set on a hill. And in Jesus' day, they would build cities out of white rocks. So when they had torches lit, they would shine for all to see. Now notice that Jesus does not just say you are a city on a hill. The Greek word says you are a city set. You are a city placed. You are a city God ordained. And so sometimes we wonder, why did God put me where I am? Why do I have these neighbors? Why do I have to deal with these co-workers? Why did you put my church in this community? Why do I have to deal with this community? Why do I have these problem people? Because you are a city placed in that place for God to use. It is not an accident. It's not coincidence. God has placed you in your home. He's placed you in your work. He's placed you in your church. He's placed your church. He's placed you in Uganda to be a light to people around you. You are the light. No one else can be the light. People who don't know Jesus can't be the light of your community. Would you thank God
olowooza nti katonda
that he's placed you as the light
nti akutadde okubeera ekitangaala
where you are? Where you are.
awo wooli.
Now, notice what he says.
Tegeera kino ky'agamba.
He says, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl.
Agamba nti teri akoleza kitangaala n'akiteeka mu kibbo.
Instead, they put it on its stand,
bakiteeka waggulu,
and it gives light to everyone in the house.
ne kyakira buli muntu yenna.
If you are a light,
bw'oba oli kitangaala,
you shine.
oyaka.
Now, how do we do that?
Ekyo tukikola tutya?
In verse 16,
mu lunyiriri olw'ekumi
in the same way,
mu ngeri y'emu,
let your light shine before men,
omusana gwammwe gwakirenga abantu bonna,
that they may see your good deeds
balabenga ebikolwa bye ebirungi,
and praise your Father in heaven.
era batendereze kitaawe ali mu ggulu.
Now, you may say, how do I shine my light?
Oyinza okwebuuza ekitangaala kyange nkyasa ntya?
God, if you put me in this place
agamba nti bw'onteeka mu kifo kino
and you want me to be here,
ng'oyagala mbeere wano,
what am I to do?
kiki kye nnina okukola?
He said, your good deeds.
Agamba nti ebikolwa byo ebirungi.
Now, in the Greek language,
mu lulimi Oluyonaani,
there are two words the author could use for good.
waliyo ebigambo bibiri omuwandiisi bye yali asobola okukozesa obulungi.
One word
ekigambo ekisooka
speaks of morally good.
kyogera ku kubeera n'empisa ennungi.
A second word
ekyokubiri
that he uses speaks of morally good, but beautiful.
agamba nga kirungi naye nga kibalagavu.
They're brilliant deeds.
ebikolwa byo ebiyitirivu obulungi.
They're attractive deeds.
ebikolwa byo ebisikiriza.
They make people want to be around.
abantu basobole okuba nga baagala okubeera w'oli.
And they show how attractive
era balabe ekibasikiriza.
God is.
balabe nga katonda bw'asikiriza okusemberera.
He said, you are the light.
agamba nti muli kitangaala.
You're a city placed where you are.
muli kibuga ekiteekeddwawo we muli.
And your brilliant good deeds,
era ebikolwa byammwe ebirungi ennyo,
your attractive actions,
ebyo ebikolwa byammwe ebisikiriza,
point people to the Father.
bireetera abantu okutunuulira taata.
That when we do things
nti bwe tukola ebintu
that no one else will do,
nga teri mulala ayinza bikola,
it points people to the Father.
abantu baba balaba katonda taata.
When we love people,
bwe twagala abantu,
no one else will love.
teri muntu mulala yenna ajja kwagala.
It points them to the Father.
ekyo kibalaga eri kibatunuuliza ku taata.
When we show mercy
bwe tulaga okusaasira
instead of
mu
judgment,
kifo ky'okusala omusango,
it points them to the Father.
kibalaga taata.
When we live
bwe tubeerawo
hungry for righteousness,
nga tuyaayaanira enjala, nga tuluma enjala olw'obutuukirivu,
it points people to the Father.
kiba kiraga abantu okutunuulira Kristo taata.
When we are pure in our motives,
bwe tubeera abatukuvu oba abatuukirivu mu bintu byaffe,
it points people to the Father.
kiraga abantu taata.
When we don't live in the blessing we have,
bwe tutabeera mu mukisa gwe tulina,
it doesn't point people to the Father.
ekyo abantu baba tebalaba taata.
But when we get up every day
naye buli lwe tuzuukuka buli lunaku
and we say, I'm blessed with every spiritual blessing,
ne tugamba nti mpeereddwa omukisa na buli mukisa gwonna ogw'omwoyo,
that I can see God,
nti nsobola okulaba katonda,
that I've got His mercy,
n'okusaasira kwa katonda,
that I will be filled,
nti nja kujjuzibwa,
that I will be called a child of
nti nja
God,
kuyitibwa omwana wa katonda,
and we live that way,
era ne tubeera mu mbeera bw'etyo,
we are salt,
tubeeramu nnyo,
we stop the decay,
tuba tulemesa okuvunda,
and we point people to our beautiful
era abantu
Savior.
tuba tubalaga omulokozi omulungi ennyo oyo.
It's not trying harder,
tekuba kugezaako nnyo bakufuba nnyo,
it's walking in who Jesus says we are.
kiba tulina kukola bukozi kubeera ekyo Yesu kyagamba kye tuli.
He says we have a new identity.
agamba nti tulina ekifaananyi ekipya.
I'm salt.
nze ndi munnyo,
I stop the decay.
nkomya okuvunda,
I'm light.
Ate ndi kitangaala.
And I point people to Jesus.
Abantu mbalaga Yesu.
Let's stand together and pray.
Katuyimirire wamu ffenna tusabe.
Okay. Okay, it's been a long day. And you did well on a full tummy. Because I fall asleep when my tummy's full. Oh, good.